Good morning once again, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the fourth plenary session. The topic of this session is Indian Knowledge System in the 21st Century Challenges and Opportunities. We are honored to have with us on the stage Dr. Vinay Sahasrabudhe, President of ICCR. Chairing this session is Dr. Pankaj Mittal, Secretary General, Association of Indian Universities, and our speaker is Indologist Mr. Michel Danino. To begin with, may I request Dr. Vinay Sahasrabudhe to kindly extend a floral welcome to both our guests. Mr. Michel Danino and Dr. Pankaj Mittal. Thank you. I request Dr. Vinay Sahasrabudhe to kindly make his opening remarks, and I welcome on stage the Director General of ICCR, Shri Kumar Tuhin.
Chair of this session, Dr. Pankaj Mittal, who is Secretary General of the Association of Indian Universities. Michel Danino, who is a very well-known Indologist, known for his prolific writing. Several books are to his credit, and currently he is with the IIT, Indian Institute of Technology, Ahmedabad. And his speech itself will make you understand about the person himself, and there is going to be some brief introduction to him as well, so I won't spend time on that. I just wanted to take 2 minutes to explain you the scheme of things which is there behind all these sessions. As it happens, yesterday we started with an inaugural session, and there was a session about the governmental efforts for Indian knowledge system. So that, I'm sure, must have given you a fair idea as to how the government of India is looking at Indian knowledge systems, of which all the subjects that you are teaching in your universities are a significant part. Later on, we discussed in the afternoon session the challenges that you are facing and how together we can perhaps try to meet them effectively. This morning, we had a dedicated session on Ayurveda and Yoga, because without Ayurveda and Yoga, perhaps the idea of Indian knowledge systems cannot be complete. There are many other subjects also, but naturally the prominence of healthcare related issues today, and therefore the relevance of Ayurveda, I believe, is something nobody can deny. And now we have an Indologist who will be explaining us the relevance of Indian knowledge systems in the modern world, what kind of challenges are there and what could be the ways to meet with them. And AIU, Association of Indian University, senior academic herself, and the Secretary General, she will also present her view and tell us how Indian universities are trying to deal with these new, not new subjects, but subjects which have now got more prominence. Later on, we will be also discussing the employment opportunities, career opportunities with the representatives of others. So in between, Dr. Danino will be explaining us. And in just one sentence, if I can describe Michel Danino, I mean, we know the history of India had several knowledge yatris, I would say, who took their sojourn to India in quest of knowledge. It was Fahiyan, Yuan Sang, Al-Biruni, so on and so forth. So perhaps it would not be unfair to describe that Mr. Danino is the Yuan Sang of the modern day. Only thing is that Yuan Sang went back to China, and Danino has made this knowledge land his own karma bhumi kind of, and therefore he is totally immersed in the idea of India. He is I should say, a disciple of Aurobindo and Ma from Puducherry. I'm sure many of you are aware of that, and has been in teaching and learning of Indian knowledge systems, basically Indian culture, Indian philosophy for a very long time. He is extremely busy, but on my personal request, he tried to make it over here. Most welcome, sir, and thank you very much.
Before we proceed, a few words about the chair and the speaker. Chairing this session is Dr. Pankaj Mittal, Secretary General, Association of Indian Universities. Dr. Pankaj Mittal is the second woman Secretary General of the association in its 97 years of existence. Dr. Mittal earlier served as the first regular Vice Chancellor of Bhagat Phool Singh Mahila Vishwavidyalaya, Kanpur, the first rural women's university of North India at a young age of 44 years, to undertake the onerous task of developing a tiny Gurukul into an institution of repute. Dr. Mittal introduced a series of innovative practices and reforms as the Vice Chancellor of the multi-faculty Women's State University, imparting education to 7,000 girls from KG till PhD level in a holistic manner. During her stint as Vice Chancellor, Dr. Mittal transformed the Gurukul into a university, which is now on the international map. French-born Michel Danino has lived in India since 1977 and has been an Indian citizen since 2004. He has written on Indian civilization and culture. Since 2011, he has taught courses on Indian civilization and knowledge systems at IIT Gandhinagar. Michel Danino is a member of the National Steering Committee for the Development of National Curriculum Frameworks in the Ministry of Education, among other official bodies, and is the recipient of the prestigious Padma Shri Award in 2017. I request the Chair, Dr. Pankaj Mittal, to kindly make her opening remarks and take over the proceedings of this session.
Thank you, and a very good afternoon to all of you. First of all, let me compliment the ICCR, especially the President ICCR and the DG ICCR, for holding a conference on such an important theme. Indian knowledge system is something which is being talked about not only in India, but all over the world today. So thank you, sir, for holding a conference on this important thing and inviting the best speakers like Michelle Danino, Tanuja was speaking earlier. So best speakers are there on the best topics. So my compliments to ICCR for holding this conference. Now, when we talk of Indian knowledge system in the contemporary times in the 21st century, I am from the education sector. So we know that it is very, very important that the students of Indian higher education system should be aware of Indian knowledge systems. And unless the students, and all of you must be knowing that India is the second largest higher education system in the world. And we have something like 1,100 universities. We have around 45,000 colleges, and around 40 million students are studying in these universities and colleges. So these 40 million students, and in addition to that, we have something like 300 million students in our schools. So if 340 million students are made aware of Indian knowledge systems, which they should be, I think there is a lot of potential, and we can really go ahead and our new generation. I mean, we say that India is the youngest country in the world. We have a demographic dividend to our advantage. So this demographic dividend can really become a dividend if our younger generation knows about Indian knowledge system. So keeping this in mind, the Association of Indian Universities last month, we held a Vice Chancellor's Conference on Indian knowledge systems. And many, many important things came out, many important recommendations came out during that. And many, many new revelations were there in that conference. For example, if you ask, what is Indian knowledge system? Is it the knowledge which is contained in our Vedas, Upanishads, scriptures, or something more than that? So it was very clearly mentioned that it is all that knowledge which is contained in our scriptures, plus the practices we follow now, the cultural practices, the religious practices, the festivals we celebrate. So all that constitutes Indian knowledge system, not only the knowledge which is contained in the Vedas, Upanishads, and our old scriptures. Second thing was Can we teach Indian knowledge system maybe through a separate paper? Like if we introduce a separate paper in our universities, colleges, will that be the right approach to teach Indian knowledge system to our students? Again, the answer was no. It was said that the Indian knowledge system should be integrated in each and every course, in each and every paper. It should form the foundation of our education system. Having a separate paper at a higher level, maybe it is okay, but we should try to integrate Indian knowledge system with each and every course in the university, for which a lot of efforts are required. We talked about how to introduce Indian knowledge system in teaching learning. And then we realized that the national education policy which we have, India introduced a new education policy which we call National Education Policy 2020, where we talked about, say, multiple entry exit, we talked about holistic development, we talked about personalized learning, we talked about experiential learning. And when we go back to our history, when we go back to our Gurukul system, we see that all that was contained there already. In the Gurukuls, the Guru Shishya Parampara, there was a personalized learning. The Shishya was being taken care of by the Guru in a very, very personalized manner. Maximum amount of learning was through experiential learning. The Shishya used to stay in the Gurukul under the supervision of the Guru, and there was a lot of experiential learning. A lot of emphasis was there on holistic development, because it was not that only you will be understanding, different subjects will be taught, but holistic development and interdisciplinarity, that was also taught in the Gurukuls by the Gurus to our Shishyas. So all the premise of national education policy, we realized, was based on the Guru Shishya Parampara, based on the Indian knowledge system, based on what was contained in our scriptures. We were talking of, say, for example, if you talk of the curriculum, and when we was talking about the curriculum integration, can we do curriculum integration in the sense, for example, when we teach management and when you teach decision theory, can we take case studies from our mythology? Can we take case studies from, say, even recently, I mean, the recent phenomena of dabbewalas or crowd management in Kumbh Mela, or decision theory in terms of, say, for example, in Ramayana, when Hanuman goes to Ashok Vatika and he's sitting there and he has to appear before Sita, he thinks, in what form I should come before Sita. If I come in the form of a sage or sannyasi, Sita may not believe, because she was just deceived in that particular attire by Ravan. If he comes in his original form, maybe Sita will be scared because he was a Vanar. So what he decides is that he sits on the tree under which Sita was sitting, and he starts in a very, very low tone, he starts singing the Ram Stuti. So when Ram Stuti he sings, and then he silently drops the ring of Rama over there, and when the Sita sees Ram, that ring, and she sees up, and then she realizes that yes, it is something who is being sent by Rama himself. So decision-making theory, even the team building, like making a Vanar Sena by Ram, seeing the capacity of each person, how it can be complementing each other, many, many things. Like when you talk of conflict management, can we refer to Bhagavad Gita? Because Bhagavad Gita talks about conflict management. So how to introduce Indian knowledge system in each and every program or course of a university, that is something which should happen. When we talk of sustainability, again, there was a session on sustainability, IKS in sustainability. Now, whole world is talking about sustainability. We have sustainable development goals. But in our ancient texts, we talk of Ayurveda. We just had a session on Ayurveda. Ayurveda talks about sustainability in terms of physical health, mental health, spiritual health, integration of all three. When we talk of yoga, it is a sustainability. Today, we are talking of organic products. We are talking of organic agriculture. But at that point of time, it was a sustainable agriculture practice. So what I want to say is that Indian knowledge system is already embedded in our lives. It was there in our scriptures. slowly, there was a period when we forgot about it. Now we are coming back to it, and when we come back to it, there's a lot to learn from it. So that is what we want should be taught in the universities, in the colleges. And there are many universities who are having the centers for IKS. The government of India itself has established a center on IKS under Dr. Ganti Murthy. Dr. Ganti Murthy was a speaker in our conference also. He spoke very well. So we at the university level, we are taking, or at the school level also, so our education system, which is taking care of 340 million students, if IKS doesn't percolate there, then it's very difficult to cut an ice. So my request, if the teachers are there, universities are there, educationists and academicians are there, that we should introduce IKS in our entire curriculum, and not only the curriculum, the pedagogy, the way we teach, in our research, in our governance, everywhere. If we introduce Indian knowledge system, I think we can make a headway in this area. The main speaker is Michel Danino, so I should not be cutting away his time. I'm not an expert on Indian knowledge system, he is. So I'm sure he will be speaking much more on this. One or two things about his sort of achievements, which I think you should be knowing, is that he is a student of Indian civilization, culture and history, and he has lectured widely. And he wrote a brief history of the Aryan problem in the Indian context. And the title was The Invasion That Never Was. That is a very good book, which later came into French and now a larger volume in English also. And another notable book was The Lost River on the Trail of the Saraswati. So where he explores the ancient Saraswati River, which is mentioned in the ancient Indian scriptures, but is believed to have dried up. So Danino's research delves into the archaeological, geological, and hydrological aspects of Saraswati River. So he is a known figure in the field of Indology, and he has done a very vast study in the field of Indian civilization. I'm sure it will be a treat to listen to him. So over to Michel for his comments. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Namaste, everyone. And first of all, my gratitude to Dr. Vinay Sahasrabudheji for having invited me, despite some reluctance on my part, basically for reasons of time. Respects to Dr. Pankaj Mittal, and thanks for her generous introduction, and Shri Kumar to him. I apologize, first of all, for not having been with you yesterday and earlier this morning, and having missed some very valuable sessions. I got a few glimpses of the last one. I also know how eloquent my good friend Dr. Ganti Murthy can be, and how passionate he is about Indian knowledge systems. I would like to make this talk a little bit personal, if you don't mind, so that it maybe will be not so formal. And it's a lot about my own experience. My own experience in two ways. First of all, in the Indian scene. So I think that Dr. Pankajji has very well summarized the kind of divorce that the average Indian student, we talk about average because of course there are brilliant exceptions everywhere, but the average Indian student, whether at college level or at school level, is completely divorced from the roots of Indian civilization. This is a fact that I think we are all familiar with. I need not emphasize it. I can just give one tiny anecdote as an example. When 22 years ago, there was in Trivandrum in Kerala, Thiruvananthapuram, a huge international conference on the Bhagavad Gita. The late Parameshwarji had organized it. And there were delegates from all over the world. And there was one Greek philosopher, Emilios Buratinos, I still remember his name, who became a good friend. And when we told him that, and he was studying Indian texts and Indian philosophies, and he was, of course, very well rooted in Greek philosophy to begin with. And when we told him that Bhagavad Gita is not part of school education at any level and from any angle, he could not believe. He said, what is this? It's not possible. You must be playing a joke on me. You have one of the greatest treasures of humanity, and how can it not find some place in the school system. Or so this is, I could multiply examples, but you know them already. So this is one major problem, and which I have kind of tried to deal with in my own way, either through writings or online talks, but also through my own courses. I've been teaching not at school level though, more at university level, different institutions, and in the past 12 years, IIT Gandhinagar in Gujarat, and developing my own courses on Indian civilization, various aspects, which I hope to put all online before too long. But I could also see, while doing this, it was a great learning experience for me because I could see the kind of prejudices that the students came to me with. Tremendous prejudices sometimes about their own society and culture. And sometimes a very, very dark picture of Indian, especially in humanities, when you deal with postgraduate students, and they come convinced that Indian society is just a dark place full of discrimination and exclusion and a regressive past and basically nothing much else. So how do you deal with this? Then, of course, I also interacted with a number of Indologists worldwide of all kinds. Well, you know the context better than I do. And I found that there were certain problems. There was often a lot of goodwill. There were outstanding scholars, brilliant scholars, I mean, whom I have admired because I cannot, come to 10% of their knowledge. But there were also certain issues. So I'm going to just discuss this at a very personal level, and I'll take the help of a few slides. Do I have the slide changer? Is there a slide? This is a slide changer?
Yes.
Oh, I see. How does it work? Okay. Yeah. So, first of all, this is for me a nice symbol of Indian civilization. On the left, you have Saraswati from Gangaikonda Cholapuram temple in Tamil Nadu. And Saraswati got lost at some point. And in fact, in Indian poetry, Kalidasa, for example, Saraswati is a synonym for loss at some point. So this is the loss of Indian civilization in a way. But then it gets reborn. It gets reborn through Ganga on the right. You see standing on the Gangetic Gharial as her Vahana. And all her attributes in the Rig Veda and later Vedic texts were transferred actually to Ganga, which in the Rig Veda itself, as you know, plays no significant part at all. So it's this cycle of loss, decline, and rebirth, which is something fairly not unique to India at all. Other civilizations also went through it, but then we all know that the ancient civilizations on the world all but disappeared. And this one, somehow, for a variety of complex factors, which I do not claim to be unraveling today, somehow managed to survive with some contact with her ancient foundations and roots. So anyway, this is something about this, the Indian civilization. But then I would like also to, first of all, begin with the challenges and then the opportunities. And we know that challenges are nothing but opportunities in disguise. So let me start this journey with, first of all, systemic challenges. Well, there's not much that I can tell you that you do not know already. So I'm going to be very quick about this. We know how little room, space is given, whether in the rest of the world or in India so far. Hopefully in India the scene will be changing gradually to India studies, Indology, study of Indian knowledge systems, let's just say the whole entire cultural and heritage of India. And this is a problem for, I have some contacts with scholars in France, which is the country of my birth, and how I know how they have to struggle at times, and sometimes departments close, funds are drying off, and therefore the whole survival of the field is at stake. This is definitely a systemic challenge which is there all over the world, and in fact, it also concerns other fields of humanities as well. So this is not simple to address, and I'm not claiming to do that today. In India also, we do have the problem that there are no efficient mechanisms at present to integrate, as Dr. Pankajji was saying, this whole field of knowledge into the entire educational system. Many bodies, many groups are trying to work it out. In fact, I'm involved with the Ministry of Education with the entire redrafting of school syllabi across India, and we are trying to integrate, as you rightly said, it is the same problem here, integrate some elements of some fundamentals of Indian culture here and there in an intelligent manner. What do I mean by intelligent, by the way? And this we can save time for later, is simply avoidance of hollow, exaggerated glorification, which is very often a pitfall that enthusiasts fall into when they want quick results. Then you end up glorifying the civilization, making a lot of exaggerated claims, and it actually is totally counterproductive and is unnecessary also, because what we have to do simply is to bring the right knowledge in a very sober-headed manner, and that is quite sufficient. And then trust the student that he or she is able to make sense of it and draw the lessons that have to be drawn. So scholarly now, there are certain issues which I have encountered, and this is not only about the West, it's also equally about India, because let us not forget that these stereotypes often have colonial roots. They are the fruit of the 19th century, where a lot of great scholars, British or generally European, tried to make sense of this civilization. And, they were not used to a civilization with this kind of time depth and also geographical extent. And some of them had a lot of goodwill and did outstanding work. Some didn't have so much of goodwill because they had other intentions, for example, the Christianization of India. And whatever the objectives may be, the fact is that they had to look at this very different civilization through their own cultural lens. And we all know that this will inevitably color the result. So the whole field of India studies in India has been impacted very, very deeply by these colonial inputs. Some of them were sound, for example, good methods in history, in archaeology, but then there was so much of cultural baggage that came with it that this has left a very difficult legacy at times. So some is, first of all, that indigenous or native scholars don't really matter. This is something that we find quite widespread. I've seen many students happily quoting to me, 10 names of Western scholars and forgetting or ignoring that there are equally important scholars right here at home. And when we tell them that, why don't you include them, they're actually surprised and ignorant. So this is a bias which is built in, and which, of course, every teacher and every student of goodwill has to address. And also, every Indologist, any serious scholar of India studies should make efforts to find out what is the depth of knowledge here available in India. It's not always easy. I have found some of the very best scholars here being completely hidden, unknown, in some little corner of a village or a town, and producing amazing stuff, but totally unknown from worldwide academic networks. So this is a difficulty, and it requires a special effort to address it. Secondly, as I said, the stereotypes. So first of all, this what I call, I'm putting this in a very personal language, please don't mind, and I'm not at all trying to be negative or critical. It's just what I have personally experienced. So this sharpening of fault lines, what does it mean? It means that the West has a certain history which is full of divisions, clashes, very, very, what shall I say, destructive developments at times. I mean, let's not forget 2 world wars in our last century, and we don't still know how many world wars we're going to have in this current century. And imagining that they had to, look at India in the same light. So therefore, exaggerating certain divisive features and ending up, whether intentionally or not, misportraying certain important phenomenon. So naturally, of course, caste is presented in an entirely negative manner, and the moment you even utter the word caste, you're expected to demonize Indian society. If you don't do that, then there's something wrong with you. And this is completely forgetting the historical role of the caste system, what it actually, the way it shaped Indian society in a way that made it more resilient. Whether we like it or not, it is a fact. The fact that Christian missionaries were cursing the caste system all the time because it was the first major obstacle to the Christianization of India, and so on and so forth. And also the economic benefit of the jati, I would not use the word caste actually, the Varna Jati organization of Indian society, which gave a place to everyone in professional terms, in terms of skill and competence, and therefore made India an economic powerhouse for something like not far from 2,000 years. If you say, let's begin 500 BC till 15 or 1600 CE. So anyhow, the point is that when you have to study such a massive, complex, mind-boggling, organic system, organic because ultimately there was never a central authority in India which decided about how castes are going to be organized. The society self-decided and self-organized. So we don't understand that it's an organic feature. And yes, of course, it has very negative aspects and consequences which have to be faced honestly. But then the entire working is lost in the process. Then Buddhism, Jainism as movements of rebellion against this caste system. Well, this is a caricature. Of course, it's a little bit of that, but there's so much more. And they are nothing, I mean, they share so much. So, the problem is that the moment we stick those very neat English labels, so Hinduism is one label, then Jainism is one label, and Buddhism is one label, and we start imagining that these are 3 separate things. And they are not. When I tell my students that the man in the street, the average Indian 2,000 years ago could be Hindu, Jain, and Buddhist at the same time. They stare at me blankly, they don't understand. And it's true. Of course, the monks were the ordained, the scholars, that was a different matter. They were ordained under certain orders, and those were very distinct. And sometimes they were rivaling each other, that is true. But you see the notion, for example, of sharing of sacred spaces, how you can visit site after site in India, where you will go to Ellora caves, for example, if you want just one example, where you will see Jains and Buddhists and Hindus coexisting in the very same space, and we portray them almost as deadly enemies. So this is one other example, and the last I can take a dozen others, is the portrayal of the Bhakti movement as nothing but a social movement of rebellion against higher caste dominance. This is the most absurd distortion I found, when it was exactly the opposite, where this effervescence of bhakti seized the whole of India and vertically integrated the society, because you had people from all castes and both genders contributing to it. So I will not dilate upon, the Maharashtra saints, for example, but Vinayji here could tell you about them and how they belong to all castes and impacted the whole society. And nobody was bothered whether the saint in question came from, a Brahmin or a low caste. So these are some of the important distortions that we have to address. Denial of continuity is something I have found very stubbornly voiced by some Western scholars who have great learning. I cannot even rival them. But the way they insist that, for example, I quote one of them, Hinduism is a recent imagination. It is not no more than 300 years old. It's a result of the colonial rule. And there is no continuity with the older Vedic forms and so on. So this is a topic which itself would require a couple of hours to develop in full, is a way to misunderstand India very deeply, because if you do not acknowledge this continuity and these ancient roots, then you cannot understand how the Indian mind functions even today. In very humble Indians in the street, an auto rickshaw wala or a farmer, you can find something in the way the mind functions which can go back to very ancient times. And it's not difficult. But all you have to do is, of course, attune yourself to these very ancient roots. And neglect of knowledge traditions, in the sense that sometimes a lot of scholars imagine, and this is also because of the wrong that our universities have been doing. If you go to Sanskrit departments, for example, till recently, or philosophy departments, till recently, apart from the language itself, almost all they would study is Advaita Vedanta. And maybe one or two more philosophical systems. They never even understood, they never knew. I've met a lot of PhDs in Sanskrit, and of course they know the language very well. And when you tell them that there are Sanskrit texts on architecture and mathematics and elephant training and governance systems and so on and so forth, they are surprised. They've never been exposed to them. So these knowledge traditions are given a kind of a second-hand treatment when actually they should be foregrounded, and they are as important as the philosophical traditions. So this is another set of prejudices. And basically this concept that India has been a stagnant society, not understanding the kind of tremendous changes it underwent, the kind of mobility also that there was in ancient India. For example, returning to the caste system, we have lots of texts and inscriptions testifying to the fact that Varna and Jati was not fixed. It could move. It could evolve. This is well known. If you just Google caste mobility in ancient India, you will find a lot of references. But this is not accepted, and we imagine that India has always been the way we see it today. And this is, of course, a caricature. Finally, in this fairly dark, pessimistic portrayal of India, we forget completely how much India contributed to world culture. And here I'm not claiming that India only contributed, it also received at times. But this is one topic I've researched fairly in depth, and I hope one day I'll write a little book about this, because it's either you have excellent scholarly books, but not within the reach of the average public, or you have again this hollow glorification I mentioned at the very beginning. The point is that my own estimate is that India's interaction with other cultures and civilizations, which by the way has almost always been peaceful, unwarlike, with a very, very tiny exception of a Chora campaign into Indonesia. That was for political reasons. It made no difference to the cultural impact of India. It was not a vehicle for it. But in all these interactions, I find that India has been massively a giver, much more than a recipient. It did receive a few things, no doubt. You can see it in our 7 weekdays. You can see it in the 24 hours of the day. You can see it in some Greek influence on the Gandhara art of the first few centuries BC and so on. So there are traces of influences, yes, by all means, and we must study them also. But the Jantar Mantar, which is right across the street here, is actually a confluence of Indian people. Some people say Hindu, but it's not a proper term here. Indian astronomy, Islamic astronomy called Zij astronomy, which is actually a very interesting circuit because it originates in India, then adds different ingredients from ancient Greek astronomy and then comes back to India. So it's a complex circuit. And even European astronomy, which was conveyed by Jesuit scholars that Jai Singh invited to his court. So this is a good symbol just across the street of a kind of a cultural confluence with some borrowings. But by and large, India has been a massive giver. And this is something which is not properly assessed and definitely missing from Western perspectives in elsewhere in the world. Let me now, before I come to the opportunities, but the opportunities are beginning to be very obvious, let me very briefly give you the last slides of a course which I used to conduct at the master's level called Perspectives on Indian Civilization, where I have tried to delineate 12 master ideas of Indian civilization. I borrowed the term master idea from Sri Aurobindo, great thinker and great Indian master, as you know, and where he argues that every civilization has a few key master ideas that propel it. And I found that these 12 were all equally important, and that they are all embedded they should be embedded in a proper study, objective study of Indian civilization. So let me quickly run through them, because each of them could be the object of not even 1 or 2 lectures, but actually a full course. So I'll just list them. First of all, the fact that everything in this universe is symbolic. So these are not always expressed like that in the ancient texts. This is my own distillation of them. But the fact that we can take a mountain, it is a symbol. We can take a planet, it is a symbol. We can take a human being, it is a symbol that can be transferred into a temple, into other things, and so on. So this universe is symbolic. And the big scale of it and the small scale of it are constantly interacting. This is a fundamental principle of Ayurveda, for example, which you were discussing earlier, where the human body functions like the universe with the same 5 Mahapanchabhuta, the same three dosha, and it is the same metabolisms that the universe itself follows. And if this equation is not present in our mind, then there are lots of things we're going to miss. Thirdly, that this universe, but also our human life and society, are a constant struggle between chaos and order. This is there in the Rig Veda. It becomes a little less explicit later, though it is scattered here and there. And this is a very, very important thought. Not unique to India, though, because the Greeks also had something equivalent. The Greeks had a concept of chaos and chronos, as you well know, tussling at the beginning of the creation of this universe. But this is very important in the Indian context, because the acknowledgement of chaos, in fact, sometimes you feel that they even revel in chaos. But then there has to be some order at the root of it, or following it, otherwise nothing will be controllable in the end. Everything is interconnected, and that we know. I think the Upanishads are emphatic about it, and this will have very important implications on the ecological, environmental thought of India, the approach to nature, and also this sense of compassion, which often pervades Indian thought towards lesser creatures, for example. I am skipping because, so this is actually a quotation from one Upanishad. All things are impelled by consciousness. Therefore, at a certain level, it's all one, or all has the same foundation. Very important concept of Swabhava and Swadharma. This is where Indian civilization radically departs from the Judeo-Christian world. In the Judeo-Christian world, the 3 monotheistic religions, there is one truth for all. Well, Judaism is a special case because Judaism is not seeking to convert others. But nevertheless, they have the true God. So there you have one path for all ultimately. In Christianity, in Islam, India is absolutely the opposite. There cannot be one path for all. It's impossible because we are all different. We are all the same at a certain level, but then we have this Swadharma, self path, and Swabhava, self-nature. And we differ from each other. Therefore, it's impossible for us to have a common path. And therefore, the multiplicity of paths that you find in India, which never ceases to grow. I mean, you always have new teachers, always have new saints, always have new pioneers, and this is fine. The society completely accepts it. Well, eventually, if you claim to be an avatar today, you can, but whether you'll be recognized as an avatar after 50 or 100 years is for the society to organically decide at the end of the day. But nobody will bother you. So this is something which, feeds what we call pluralism and this very ugly word of tolerance. Ugly because toleration is a Christian concept. Please read Voltaire's treatise on toleration, 18th century, brilliant text, still valid. And it's not an Indian concept. There's nothing to tolerate. Tolerate means I have to tolerate you. I just tolerate you because I have no choice. But this is not the Indian context. It is acceptance of the other, because we are all facets of one truth which cannot be expressed by a single individual. You know all this, so I can skip. But it also leads to resistance to centralization and uniformization in Indian society. Indian society has always resisted standardization, uniformization, centralization for these reasons. That every small unit of it claims freedom to organize itself and follow its own path. Unity in diversity, it follows naturally. It's a logical step. Then this very important concept in the Bhagavad Gita of Nishkama Karma. Why is it so important today? Because we have been poisoned by this culture and hunt for success at any cost. And this is something which luckily is beginning to break down, but especially this American culture of success, succeeding, winners and losers is extremely harmful. It has ruined endless numbers of lives. And it creates this rat race. And as an American thinker himself, I forget the name, used to say, whoever wins the rat race ultimately is still a rat. So this is something that in India is invalid. There is no success, there is no failure. What you think is your success might actually end up being a failure in the end, or a path to ruin, and vice versa. Because all you have to do is be true to your purpose, be true to what you understand to be your dharma, and do your best and leave the fruits to something else, something greater than what we are. And it creates detachment, but not passivity, because you have to exert yourself. Detachment as to the fruits, and therefore there is no concept of success or failure. It's no longer valid at all. So this is so important in all ethical systems. Environmental ethics, I think you know this extremely well. I don't have to dilate upon this. It's this concept that everything being imbued with consciousness, the entire creation is sacred. And this is a major departure again from the Judeo-Christian system, where you have a divorce between the creator and the created. There is no such divorce here. Vishnu has two wives. There is Lakshmi, the Divine Mother, but there's also Bhu Devi, the earth. And they are equal. They are not. Bhu Devi is not lower than Lakshmi. There is no divorce between. So all this is symbolic, of course. And when you see all these beautiful statues, you have to understand the symbols behind. So this message is constantly conveyed in Indian text and used to be followed by a lot of practices, which I don't have time to dilate. The environmental practices of traditional India are well known, well documented, very interesting. Of course, they are on the path to being lost, but there are also attempts to revive them as much as possible and integrate them in a new view of environment in the 21st century. The concept of wealth is different. Wealth is something, because of the Purushartha, you know very well what that means. Wealth has to be under the overarching Purushartha of Dharma. So therefore, you are encouraged to acquire wealth. Wealth is not an object of guilt. In Christianity, it used to be. In Christianity, the poor were glorified. Of course, the church never quite practiced that, but there was a glorification of poverty, the meek and so on. But in India, actually, there is no demonization of wealth as long as it is used in a dharmic way for ultimately the benefit of the society. So it's not charity. It's not just that you give a few rupees to a poor person. You can do that, but that is not the concept of Artha. Collaboration in preference to competition. Please visit any old town, sometimes even quarters of new cities, but any old town in India, and go to the commercial areas. You will see all the jewelers together, all the hardware shops together, all the groceries together, more or less in the same areas. Why? They're supposed to compete against each other. Yeah, they compete, but they also collaborate. They share a lot. They share resources. They share material. They'll send their customers to each other. And this is a legacy of the ancient business practices in India that depended much more on collaboration, especially through the system of guilds, than on competition. I don't have time to say more about this, but this is quite important. And the fact that in India there is no divorce between or there should not be. In practice, often there is. But there should not be a divorce between all aspects of daily life and a spiritual life, because the objective is to imbue spirituality into everything that we do, that we speak, even that we think, if possible. So lastly, this leads us to this fundamental, I kept actually the foundation for the end, which is the divine purpose of it all, the divine purpose of life, our divine potential, and the fact that we are here for this, and therefore we have to devise methods to fulfill that potential. Now, India devised lots of methods. They are called systems of yoga, if in common parlance, systems of self-knowledge, and ultimately they have to be as diverse as the number of human beings, almost, because again, every method, every system, every approach has to address our peculiar nature. And therefore, you find this multiplicity of paths. So this is something where, of course, India has generously given to the rest of the world. And even before I left France in the 1970s, we could already see yoga centers almost at every street corner. And I know that this is something that has spread enormously, often with distortions, commercialization, and reducing also this concept of yoga to a very mechanical external aspect of things, which it is not. But nevertheless, sometimes you need, some entrance door into it. And it doesn't matter if the door is not perfect, as long as it leads you inside, then you can follow on your own. So this is something which is, of course, the foundations of Indian civilization. Without this, the rest is hanging in the air somehow. So therefore, the opportunities, which is that we live in a very, very difficult century, which promises, if there is one thing that we are sure about the 21st century, is that circumstances worldwide are going to get much worse than what they are today. I'm sorry, I am not trying to be pessimistic, but look at how things are moving everywhere. It is seen from some other planet, for example. We are regressing. We are not moving towards, a more harmonious, peaceful, enlightened society worldwide. So India has some solutions, and tried at least to implement some solutions, partly or fully, but often also in a defective manner, expectedly, because humans are imperfect and no society is perfect. So I'm not at all trying to glorify Indian society, but to show some of the lead ideas and principles that have moved it after all. And this problem of coexistence is something that, for example, Europe is grappling with increasingly. It's not that so difficult. It's a matter of mutual respect and the fact that you acknowledge that no one can have the ultimate truth. As long as there are people on this planet who claim that they have the truth and others do not, then coexistence is not possible. India showed, at least in practice, how hundreds of sects and also communities of refugees, the Parsis, the Jews, the early Christians, even some communities of early Muslims who were persecuted in Iran and other countries for sectarian reasons. India showed how these could be integrated and live harmoniously with no danger of. For a recent example, you can take, for example, the Tibetan refugees after China's conquest of Tibet, and how they have been scattered all over India in different locations and have merged with the local population without the slightest friction that I'm aware of. So therefore, there is a model there. There is a model, and India has a key that it can offer to the world. Harmonizing the individual and the collective is something that, again, a lot of systems are struggling against. You know, the extreme is the libertarian system, where the rights of the individual are asserted above anything else. And the government's purpose is actually to serve those rights. Well, this is one extreme, but basically a lot of the thinking in the West and other places is that, you know, I have to assert myself, I have to assert my personality, I have to assert my rights. Essentially, there's nothing wrong with it. But then the collective perspective is often lost. And this is something that Indian thought, the practice can, of course, vary. Again, I'm not an idealist. I know the Indian realities, having lived here so long. But that there was always, I've seen in some communities, I've seen in some individuals, a constant concern for doing something for the society at large. So the collective is as present as the individual. And in fact, the individual finds his or her fulfillment when the society finds its fulfillment. This is the ideal. I have seen it practiced, but also I've seen, of course, denials of this beautiful principle. A new vision for world economy, because how sustainable, you know, some of you mentioned this word sustainability in the previous session. How sustainable is this world? How long can we continue exploiting natural resources? Which is actually, in India, it's again artha, it is natural wealth. It is not resources that we can freely deplete. So this concept of sustainability is something that is very much at the core of Indian practices. I will just give you the example of Ernst Schumacher, who in 1973 perhaps authored Small is Beautiful. And he did trace his ideas to Buddhism, because he lived in Burma for some time, came to India also. And he said this simple thing, which is exactly the Indian thought about economy. He said, we have made the mistake in the West, and he was advisor to the British government on economy. And he said, we've made the mistake of putting consumption at the center, whereas we should have put human happiness and satisfaction at the center. Consumption can only be a tool, nothing more than a tool. So this sums up beautifully the whole Indian approach. And this is something we're going to be compelled to return to, because our economic system is totally unsustainable. And we can see it being eroded more and more. And therefore, this line of thought, and I've seen actually a lot of environmental thinkers actually coming back to this Indian way of looking at economy. And it's not uniquely Indian either. A new approach to nature, I think I've said enough that yes, we can use nature resources, her gifts to us, but use them in a way that we give back to nature. And for too long after the Industrial Revolution, it has been only taking, hardly giving back anything. So this is not again sustainable. And we are going to face, of course, a major environmental crisis. New vision. New, I put a question mark because it's not new. But since you have discussed it sufficiently in the previous sessions, I think I can skip this. But ultimately, it goes together. Well-being, the physical well-being in the Ayurveda philosophy is inseparable from the spiritual well-being and fulfillment. They go together. You cannot have one without the other. and highlighting, this is one major opportunity that we have to highlight this relevance of these Indian knowledge systems. Maybe a few of them are reserved for scholars. I can concede that ancient Indian astronomy would not be of great use to a modern astronomer, though there would be some curious thoughts here and there. But otherwise, of course, the systems of modern astronomy are incomparably beyond what was done. So this is perhaps more for the scholars. But look at other fields. We've just mentioned Ayurveda, we've just mentioned yoga. Look at organic agriculture, the way it was practiced in India. Look at water management, and look at basically all management of resources and the whole philosophy of consumption and so on and so forth. These are things that are being codified in Indian texts. We are not studying them sufficiently. I'm glad to see a lot of studies on Arthashastra, for example, more and more. Arthashastra and economics, Arthashastra and management, Arthashastra and leadership. You have corporates in the US now giving, taking some classes on this, all to the good. Sometimes the text can be a bit distorted, doesn't matter again, it's bound to happen. But then we have to give more thought to how this huge heritage can be of a great applicability in the modern world. I will end this. Well, this is just a summary. You know, the Subhashitas, great proverbs, sayings of India. There are hundreds of them. I use a lot of them in my courses. This is just one. You may own 100 cows, but your need is only 1 cup of milk. You may own 100 villages, but your need is only 1 morsel of food. You may own a 100-room palace, but your need is only 1 cot. All the rest belongs to others. Whatever you are not using is actually not your own. Just think about these kind of brilliant principles. What does it mean in practice? What does it mean in terms of consumption? What does it mean in terms of sustainability? So these are these kind of nuggets which we can, give a lot of thought to. I will end with 2 quotations, which kind of show the way for me. And they are not from Indians. I'm deliberately not selecting Indians here. One is from U Thant, who was, some of you might remember, Secretary General of the United Nations. And this is in 1967. And this, I will just read part of it, where he is already visualizing how only a fraction of what is spent on arms, warfare, weapons, could finance all the economic, social, national, and world programs to an extent so far unimaginable. And this is something I was just viewing a short video by Carl Sagan in 1990, the US astronomer who said something very, very brilliant in this term with facts and figures about the defense budget of the US economy and how it could purchase the entire assets of the United States every year. Anyhow, men, if they unite, are now capable of forcing and to a certain point determining the future of human development. This, however, is possible only if we stop fearing and harassing one another, and if we together accept, welcome, and prepare the changes that must inevitably take place. If this means a change in human nature, well, it is high time we worked for it. What must surely change is certain political attitudes and habits that might have change in human nature. Secretary General of the United Nations. Well, this is something that, India has a lot to say about. How do we change human nature? And lastly, Gus Speth, former US advisor on climate change, just a few years ago. And, he's a hardcore journalist plus a bit of climate scientist and other things, consultant and so on. And this is what he said a few years ago. He said, I used to think that top environmental problems were biodiversity loss, ecosystem collapse, and climate change. I thought that 30 years of good science could address these problems. I was wrong. The top environmental problems are selfishness, greed, and apathy. And to deal with these, we need a cultural and spiritual transformation. And we scientists don't know how to do that. So to find such an expert acknowledging this problem and calling of all things, for a cultural and spiritual transformation, now this is where India must step in. And if India does not step in, then it is missing its role and its duty, I would say, to this 21st century. Thank you very much.
Mike.
So thank you, Danilo, for an excellent discourse. It was absolutely a treat to hear you, to learn about the challenges, opportunities. And as we always say that armies never marched out of India, ideas always marched out of India. So I will just open it to the audience for question and answers and any comments if anybody wants to make. You can raise your hands and we'll come to you one by one.
Just a small intervention.
Please.
I am Deepak Singhal. I think if everyone understands in Hindi, तो मैं अपनी बात हिंदी में रख दूँ. Otherwise, English में, I think Vinay ji, English is comfortable. So I am basically an IAS officer, a bureaucrat, worked 40 years in various positions, headed 1/6 of India as Chief Secretary of the state, and my batchmate is the Cabinet Secretary of India today. This is a new subject for me entirely. For last 1.5 years, traveled 75 countries of the globe, spoke and guided by Professor Kapil Kapoor and 100 professors of the world. I spoke to Michelle one day with Kapil ji when he got me connected. The first question is, how do we define Bharatiya Sanskriti? I am just returning from World Hindu Conference, and 4 days back I was there, 5 days back. Anywhere in the world you go, the people don't know what Bharatiya Sanskriti is. First, define what it is. Does it mean only Hinduism? Does it mean Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism all combined and all things which came out of India? There's a massive confusion in the mind of people. Ultimately, when you use the word Hindu, it is narrowing down, and this other people, like in Canada when I was there, when they say Khalistanis, they said, we are not Bharati. We have been told the Sikhs are nothing to do with Bharatiya Sanskriti, and hence the Khalistani problem arises. That is my first remark. The second thing is public-private partnership. I've been part of the government at the top level. Government has got limitations to function. So there has to be a definite model for definite public-private partnership with earth supporting dharma. There is no concept of any industrialist. If I'm the chief secretary of the state, I tell to Mr. Ambani or Adani, please send 100 crores for this purpose. Immediately the next day they'll send the check. If I say, please support Pankaj Mittal ji for her research, they'll not give 5 rupees. So that is the structural arrangement for making this second point. The last third point is, which I want to say that just as information, we have tried to create a public part of it. There's Bharati Sanskriti Vaishvik Nyas, which I'll request the DG if he can share us the participants. We'll send the details to everyone and expect the comments so that we can all work together. And I'm extremely grateful to Vinay ji to host this. And I met him earlier also. I am Hamisha unka kayal hoon that the way he takes it forward. So look forward to work together. These 3 things I wanted to point it out. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. He was just making the comments, not really.
I had a great friend in Kerala who was an accomplished poet in Malayalam and Sanskrit. And he told me this anecdote. He was a professor of English, in fact, and physics occasionally. He told me this anecdote where one day he asked his students, "Can you please define poetry? What is poetry?" And they were, of course, all struggling to find some definition about verses or whatnot. Then one bright student stood up and said, "Sir, if you ask me what is poetry, I don't know. But if you don't ask me, I know." So I think we can use the same for Bharatanatyam.
Please, can you pass on the mic to him, please?
Wonderful. Thanks for a really interesting and thought-provoking talk. My name is John Wardle. I'm from the National Centre for Naturopathic Medicine in Southern Cross University, Australia. Sorry. One of the things that really came to me, Professor Donino, is this idea of complexity. And if you're looking at engineering, information technology, they will say they've invented this wonderful science of complexity science where we understand what complex adaptive systems are. It's been used in planetary health, engineering, IT, medical advances. And it is starting to go back to traditional knowledge health systems now, but it's actually as a way of translating them for that. Whereas I think it's actually not, it seems to me that Indian knowledge should be informing the development of complexity science rather than complexity science being used to understand Indian knowledge systems. And I just wonder if you could offer some insights into how we flip that around and actually get complexity science learning from Indigenous knowledge systems rather than actually just being a tool to understand them.
Thank you, John. I think this is very challenging because it is, first of all, a systemic issue. It's also a cultural issue in the minds of the people. They have to have trust that there is some value, and these are not just grandmother recipes. By the way, grandmother recipes can be great also, and they work most of the time. But we have a systemic issue because in many countries, in fact, these systems are almost outlawed. France has almost outlawed even, what is called the herborist, which means medicinal herbs. Those who collect medicinal herbs and make all kinds of herbal teas with them, for medicinal purposes, they are actually outlawed. So healers also, there was a strong tradition of traditional healing in France. That also is outlawed. They are not allowed to practice without a proper medical degree. So there is, of course, a big, and this will vary from country to country. There are countries, again, where homeopathy is almost, well, it's not exactly an indigenous system, but it is in tune with them, almost outlawed. So, first of all, this is the biggest, to me, practical obstacle, because then it leads to a considerable dilution of these alternative systems. And there should be a recognition that however brilliant and important modern medicine is, and precious in many cases, no doubt, it should always leave the door open to collaboration with other systems. So in India, there has been at least a pioneering effort done under this Ayush concept, which you all know, where at least it's completely possible for someone to practice all these systems freely, sometimes with a little bit of recognition. And India, in this sense, could be a leader in this effort to revive traditional medical systems elsewhere. But it's ultimately in the mind. And you see that science has become such an object of cult that and this has been said by many, many Western thinkers, that science is almost like the new religion. So you have to believe in science. And we are all ready to believe in science, but why should it be the only belief? And why should science be the ultimate truth? So when, for example, I am told that homeopathy failed all medical tests, which are, rigorous protocols with the double-blind system and so on and so forth, and homeopathy has always failed. It's obvious why it should fail, because you are using a system which was devised for modern medicine and its use of medicines to assess a completely different system whose foundation, whose principles have nothing to do. Suppose you reversed it and you ask a homeopath doctor to test modern medicine by diluting them a million times, it would be absurd. You cannot establish that a system is supreme and therefore all other systems are at best curiosities or lateral supplements. As long as this prevails, it's going to be very, very difficult to revive traditional health systems. They have their foundations, they have their principles, and they should be accepted on an equal footing. Whether they can address all problems of health is something that remains to be seen in practice, but they should be given a fair chance. So this is also a problem in our mind that there's a bit of hypnotism that science triggers for all the good things it has done. It is harmful to that extent.
I'm tempted to intervene, Mishilji, here because in the parliament, I had personally raised this issue that why should we be calling what is popularly known as allopathy as modern medicine? Because it's a very judgmental nomenclature. It makes Ayurveda, Siddha and everything unmodern or non-modern. So there is modernity in. So just to label a particular thing modern, I think is not fair. I hope you will agree.
Any other question? Please, can you give the mic here?
Thank you so much, Professor Danino. You want to stand or then you want to sit? So I'll
You
sit.
can come a little this side if you want.
Okay, I'll stand here. Anyhow, I just want to thank you for a wonderful lecture, really brilliant and also critical. And refer to one point you made about comparing Svadharma to the Judeo-Christian tradition, saying that in India you have this particularism of duty as opposed to the Judeo-Christian tradition where the belief is in a monotheistic God. I want to differentiate Christianity from Judaism to say that they have a different structure to emphasize the emerging discipline of Hindu-Jewish studies and to say that in that discipline, I published a book called Dharma and Halacha, basically comparing Dharma and the Jewish law, which is similar to Dharma Shastra and Vedic Vidhis, although it doesn't have this particular Svadharma notion, and also emphasize that this discipline aims at offering alternative paradigms in the study of religion and highlight the work of Barbara Holdridge and her book Veda and Torah and a new book she's writing now, in which she offers an alternative concepts based not upon the Protestant underlying assumptions of the study of religion coming from 19th century scholarship of belief, but more on Dharma and embodied community, she said. So this is a remark that here is I would say, a gate to a new path in the study of religion, which will also highlight the Indian unique tradition. So thank you.
Thank you for this remark. I have absolutely no quarrel with what you've said. I'm not fully aware of these developments, but first of all, I have to take certain shortcuts when of course, I run through such a vast panorama. Secondly, well, it's a fact that if you read the Bible, just the Bible, the Old Testament, as the Christians call it, there is a separation between the creator and the creation. They are not on the same levels. And nowhere is it said that, for example, nature is divine or nature is sacred. It doesn't happen anywhere in the Bible. But you're quite right. And I happen to belong to a Jewish family myself, though I rejected the Bible itself early on. But I understand something of Jewish culture, and I've seen how Jewish scholars have tried to remedy this divorce and this very harsh tone sometimes by introducing a lot of concepts which are not strictly speaking in the Bible, but in Jewish thought and later Jewish philosophical developments. And I completely understand this. Even the Kabbalah itself was one such effort. And we find, for example, the development of Jewish mysticism, which is not actually in consonance with the Old Testament, just as the Christian mystics are not in consonance with the New Testament either. So there are always ways to, to adapt and kind of go back to certain healthier outlooks. And I'd be very interested to have the title of this book that you mentioned, and also the book under preparation by this lady later on. If you can please give me, I'll be very happy to study them. Thank you.
Thank you. Please at the back.
Namaste, my name is Sunil Sunkara. Professor Michel Danino, you gave us a beautiful, I would say, bouquet of 12 lotuses, Indian culture, and what I would call a masterclass on what Indian knowledge systems are. So I don't have a question, but a request. Because we had the session on yoga before this, but the maximum stretching of spine, hand, and fingers happened in your session, because everybody was taking pictures of your slides from every angle possible. And we were frantically writing to note down those 12 beautiful points. If when I saw through the ICCR, we could actually release this as an image of these 12 points, and all the delegates could share it across all social media platforms, and that would be really great to make this viral, the 12, a bouquet of lotuses, I would say.
With pleasure. With pleasure. If you find them valuable, please use them in any way you like, with or without acknowledgement. I don't mind, because they are not they are my own distillation, but I did not, of course, invent them. They're scattered in all the Indian intellectual and philosophical heritage. So you are welcome.
So let me take this opportunity to ask last question myself. So I'll speak from the perspective of universities and colleges, the area which I represent. So India has a very rich cultural heritage, but when we talk to an average university or college student and ask them that as an Indian, what are you proud of? So they will keep thinking, what am I proud of? And maybe they'll say Bollywood or cricket, but they'll not talk of rich cultural Indian heritage we have. So maybe the mistake is ours that we couldn't create a grand Indian narrative. So how to create that grand Indian narrative which every student or every Indian is proud of, and he knows that this is my roots, I should be proud of. So how to create that narrative?
Well, you yourself told us that there was a meeting of vice chancellors a few days ago. So I am sure you would have addressed that question. It's not going to happen tomorrow morning. It will take some time, because we have all these decades of neglect where Indian thought was confined to very, very few institutions, a few departments. Even there, if you looked at the average philosophy department in India, it was 90% Western philosophy. Nothing wrong with Western philosophy, but it's different. Its foundations are different. And, first of all, you study your own foundations, and then you can better study the rest of the world. Same with psychology department. They were studying Western psychology most of the time, without even being aware that yoga includes a huge field of psychology. So it's a slow and steady effort to reintegrate, and I think the key word is integration. In every field of knowledge, whether at school or at university level, without any exaggeration, being very scrupulously honest about what is being introduced, giving all references, or at least making them available to the teachers. We have to show this Indian perspective. And it's not so much about accumulating facts, because of course scholars can stifle you under mountains of facts, and they're beautiful sometimes, but it's not what students expect. It's what are the important thoughts, what are the important concepts, what are the important key ideas that you want them to really carry with them and remember. And ultimately, to me, the key word is the worldview. What is the Indian worldview of why do we take it that, there are still 2 lakhs of students every year who are giving up their Indian nationality to settle abroad. And there are many, many more lakhs of students who go abroad for study, which is fine, but who actually, this is their dream, going abroad. So clearly we have failed somewhere, and we are all honestly acknowledging that failure. There's no question. But to me, the point is that you have to restore that self-confidence, that I can stand on my roots, I can stand on my foundations, and I can look at the world and all the issues and discuss them from my perspective, my worldview. So we have to convey this worldview through a multiplicity of methods, addressing all the different fields of disciplines, but also the big issues that the world is facing. So this is something that, for example, Professor Kapil Kapoor has been saying for a long, long time. It's a matter of decolonizing the mind. Today we hear this decolonization a lot in the public discourse in India, but actually there have been pioneers like him who've been flagging this problem for something like 30 years. So how do we, so this has to be a mix of methods, and there has to be, first of all, infusion of relevant material in every possible discipline. Even in mathematics, you would be surprised we say mathematics is a universal language. Yes, today it is. But the mathematics was done in India for something like 3,000 years, possibly a little more. And there were certain specific approaches, specific methods, which still holds very interesting nuggets for a modern mathematician to study. But you go to the average mathematician and they are skeptical, when you come to them with all this baggage of Indian mathematics, they're not sure. They think you're making it up. They can't believe. So it has to start gently. And, when students at school learn the numbers, learn the decimal system, it's a natural thing to tell them that this was actually worked out here in India and show them how. And this can be done in a playful method. So we are only beginning in a way, and it's a long path. We'll have to trust the outcome.
So I agree, like when we integrate the curriculum with the Indian knowledge system, when we start teaching Bhagavad Gita as a curriculum, it will eventually lead to a grand Indian narrative, which all of our students would be knowing. Of course, it won't happen tomorrow, but eventually it will happen. So, thank you, Danino. Thanks for such a vibrant lecture. And thanks to the President ICCR and the DG ICCR for arranging this discourse. And thanks to all of you for your active participation and for being here. Thank you very much.
We'd like to thank the chair, Dr. Pankaj Mittal, also for being with us and for taking us through this session. Ladies and gentlemen, we will now break for lunch. Our next session will begin at 2:30 p.m. So kindly take your seats by then, because after that we'll have a special session with the Honorable Minister for Education. That will be a concluding session. So kindly take your seats in the post-lunch session by 2:30. So bon appetit. Enjoy your meal.